Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a story that, well, it's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it, how a trading company, the British East India Company, went from, I don't know, exchanging spices to basically building an empire.
It really is remarkable.
Yeah, and to guide us through this, we're going to be looking at some excerpts from a scholarly text focusing on 18th century India. I mean, that was really where it all kicked off for them, right?
Absolutely.
So our mission, if you will, is to unpack all those complex factors, those little details that ultimately led to their, I guess you could say, dominance, not just in India, but really on a global scale.
And it's interesting because the common narrative about the East India Company is that they were solely focused on trade.
Right, just kind of merchants doing their thing.
Exactly. But from the outset, their activities were deeply intertwined with the English crown. They weren't just merchants, they were projecting English power, English influence.
So it was never just about, like, pepper and silk.
Not at all.
There's this fascinating little tidbit about the company gifting silver plates to King Charles II and providing loans in exchange for expanded privileges.
Oh, absolutely.
It really shows you, even early on, they were kind of, I don't know, blurring those lines between commerce and political power.
Yeah, they were very strategic about that. And I think to understand that strategy, we need to look at this concept of gentlemanly capitalism.
Gentlemanly capitalism, okay.
It's a term historians like P.J. Kane and A.G. Hopkins have used to describe this really powerful alliance between the landed gentry and, the financial elite in London. And they were very instrumental in shaping the company's approach. Their primary focus was revenue, generating as much revenue as possible from the Indian territories.
So it wasn't just about, I don't know, some guys getting rich.
Well, there was definitely personal enrichment going on, but it went beyond that. It was about financing England's internal and overseas trade. It was a national strategy, really.
So the company's activities in India were kind of like bankrolling England's rise as a global power.
Precisely. But it gets even more complicated because you have to consider what historians call sub-imperialism. It's this idea that, the actions of those individuals on the ground in India could actually shape imperial policy.
So you're saying that those guys, thousands of miles away from London, making decisions on the fly, actually had a huge impact.
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't just a top-down model of control. The situation in India was far more dynamic. You had these ambitious company officials operating in a very complex, rapidly changing environment, and their decisions they have consequences.
Yeah.
And then you also have these fascinating figures, the interlopers.
Interlopers, who were they?
Basically, English merchants who were operating outside of the company's monopoly.
Oh, so like going rogue?
Essentially, yeah, driven by profit. And they created this chaotic system, often very corrupt, that really undermined the company's authority.
Wait, wasn't that illegal? I mean, to operate outside the monopoly?
Completely illegal.
Yeah.
But enforcing a monopoly across such vast distances.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Exactly. The interlopers, along with, company employees themselves engaging in private trade, it really highlights this constant tension, right, between individual ambition and the company's overall interests.
So the company was always trying to juggle their own profits with the ambitions of their employees, with the demands of the crown, and then, of course, you have the whole complex political landscape of India itself.
A real balancing act.
Yeah. And it seems like one of those kind of flashpoints in this whole struggle was this misuse of, what were they called, das tax?
Yeah, the DAS tax, essentially they were these duty-free permits that were granted to the company.
To help facilitate trade, I assume.
Right. But they were often abused, and that created a lot of tension with the Mughal rulers.
So a seemingly small thing, these das tax, became this, like, symbol, right,
Oh, absolutely.
of the company's power, and I imagine the resentment that was building up.
For the Mughals, it was a loss of control, a loss of revenue. And for the company, well, it was a way to maintain their dominance in trade. And this tension really comes to a head in Bengal, which was, the jewel in the crown for the company's trade.
Bengal, that was where the real money was, right?
It surpassed even the West Coast in importance.
Wow.
But their desire for profit, it was insatiable. And it led to conflict with the Bengal Nawab, Murshid Quali Khan, and, the misuse of das tax was right at the heart of it.
Always those das tax. It's fascinating how these little things, these administrative details, could escalate into major conflicts. It really speaks to the the underlying power dynamics at play.
Absolutely. And with the arrival of a new Nawab, Siraj-ud-Dawla, in 1756, things really started to heat up. He was determined to assert his authority, to put an end to what he saw as the company's exploitation.
Taking them head on, that seems like a risky move.
It was a complex situation. He was dealing with pressure from all sides. Disgruntled factions within his own court were looking to the company as potential allies.
Oh, so using the company to further their own ambitions.
Exactly. And then, of course, he had this growing external threat from the company itself, which was, let's say, not shy about asserting its power.
So he's caught between a rock and a hard place.
You could say that. And his attempts to rein in the company, to control the Dastaks, they were met with defiance. Governor Drake, who was head of the company in Calcutta at the time, was convinced of their military superiority. And maybe he underestimated Siraj. He ignored all attempts at diplomacy.
Oh, so a bit of arrogance there.
Perhaps he even escalated the situation, offering protection to some fugitives from Siraj's court.
Provoking him.
You could see it that way. And this all leads to a series of confrontations, culminating in, well, Siraj capturing Calcutta in June of 1756.
Wow, Calcutta, their prized possession falling to the enemy. That must have been a huge blow.
A major setback.
So what do they do?
Well, the company wasn't about to take this lying down. They dispatched a, shall we say, familiar face to retake Calcutta. Robert Clive, fresh from his victories in the South.
Clive, of course. The man, the myth, the legend.
His arrival in Bengal marks a turning point, I think it's safe to say.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Clive, he was a brilliant tactician, a ruthless pragmatist. He understood how to exploit those internal divisions, how to forge alliances to get what he wanted.
So it wasn't just about brute force.
Not at all. It was about understanding the political game, the players involved, and Bengal. Oh, Bengal was ripe for his kind of maneuvering.
A perfect storm. So walk us through this. How did Clive manage to turn the tide?
Well, he saw an opportunity within Siraj's own court. There was a lot of discontent, powerful figures like the Jagat Seth, bankers, they were looking for a change. So Clive masterminded this conspiracy, a plan to replace Siraj with his own commander-in-chief, Mir Jafar.
Playing both sides against the middle.
Precisely. These disgruntled factions, they saw an opportunity to advance their own interests by siding with the company.
It's amazing how personal ambition in these power struggles could be, manipulated.
It really highlights the complexity of Indian society at the time. The company's rise wasn't just about military might or economics. It was about understanding and exploiting those existing political dynamics.
Divide and conquer, right.
Classic strategy.
And this all culminates in the Battle of Plassey in 1757.
A battle that in itself was more of a skirmish, but its consequences, they were enormous. Siraj's forces, despite having the numbers, they were weakened by those internal divisions we talked about, and Mir Jafar's betrayal sealed Siraj's fate. The company's victory at Plassey, well, it marked a turning point. They were no longer just merchants looking for favorable trade deals. They were a force to be reckoned with, capable of shaping the entire political landscape.
It's mind-boggling how this company, starting out just wanting to trade, could become such a political and military powerhouse.
And, well, that evolution was only just beginning. The aftermath of Plassey was, it was chaotic, for Bengal, I mean. The company, now they were in the driver's seat, and they embarked on what some historians call the Plassey plunder.
Plunder. That doesn't sound very pleasant. What exactly does that mean? How much are we talking here?
Well, immediately after the battle, the company's army and navy each received a whopping £275,000 to be distributed among the troops. And that was just for starters. Between 1757 and 1760, Mir Jafar, the new Nawab, he paid out another, get this, 22.5 million rupees to the company.
Wow, those are some serious numbers.
Oh, and Clive himself. He acquired a personal jagir.
A what?
A jagir, essentially a land grant. Think, guaranteed income. His was worth, are you ready for this? $34,567 annually by 1759.
It pays to be the victor. But seriously, this influx of wealth, it must have completely changed the company's operations. How did they handle all this sudden fortune?
It completely flipped their trade structure on its head. Before Plassey, they relied heavily on importing bullion from England to finance their ventures in Bengal. But after, the flow reversed. They started exporting bullion from Bengal to China, other parts of Asia.
So Bengal basically became their money-making machine.
Exactly, and it gave them this huge economic edge over, everyone else really, especially their European rivals.
But more money, more power, that usually comes with more problems, right?
Oh, absolutely. You can't escape the human element. Company officials, they saw this success and, Well, let's just say those desk abuses became even more widespread.
So even more profit for themselves at the expense of, well, everyone else in Bengal.
Unfortunately, yeah. And this created friction with Mir Jafar. I mean, the guy was trying to keep up with the company's demands, keep his administration afloat. It was a tightrope walk.
Always this tension between profit and, like, keeping things stable enough to keep the profits flowing.
A delicate balance.
Yeah.
And with Mir Jafar, well, things eventually reached a breaking point. In 1760, the company decided, okay, we need someone who can keep up with our demands. They orchestrated another coup, replaced him with his son-in-law, Mir Qasim.
Out with the old, in with the new. But did this Mir Qasim, did he play ball?
He was, well, a different kind of ruler. More, I guess you could say, independent-minded. He wanted to assert his own authority, curb the company's, let's call it, enthusiasm for profit.
So not content to just be a puppet? Bold move.
It was. He tried to control the Dastak situation, but ultimately he just got frustrated. So he took, a radical step. He abolished all internal duties within Bengal.
Wait, so no more duties for anyone?
His logic was, if the company gets to enjoy duty-free trade, why not everyone? Level the playing field.
Seems fair on the surface.
It was a direct challenge to the company's privileged position, and they did not like it. One bit.
So what did they do?
They did what they did best. They deposed Mir Qasim and brought back good old Mir Jafar.
Back to square one.
Not quite. Mir Qasim, he wasn't going down without a fight. He fled Bengal and started putting together a pretty formidable alliance.
Against the company.
Oh, yeah? This was getting serious.
Who did he manage to get on his side?
This is where it gets interesting. He brought together, a mixed bag, but all united by their, shall we say, dislike of the company. He joined forces with the Mughal emperor Shah Alam II, who was, trying to reclaim some authority. And then there was Shuja Udullah, the Nawab of Awadh.
Okay, so we have a deposed Nawab, a powerful regional ruler, and the Mughal emperor himself. The company's got their work cut out for them.
Things were definitely heating up, and it all came to a head in 1764 at the Battle of Buxar.
Another battle, another turning point.
You could say that. This one had huge consequences for everything that followed.
So how did it go down?
The company's forces, they were actually outnumbered, but as usual, they came out on top. Superior tactics, the Allied forces were, let's say, not exactly a cohesive unit, and, there you have it.
Another victory.
A crushing blow for the alliance. And here's where things get, kind of tricky. You've got the Mughal emperor defeated. What do you do with them?
Absorb the whole Mughal empire. That seems like the logical next step.
The company was smarter than that. They understood the power of symbolism.
So they didn't want to just, get rid of him.
They kept him around, but on their terms.
So how did they pull that off?
Through a series of very carefully crafted agreements. The Treaty of Allahabad in 1765 is a prime example. They basically said to the emperor, look, we'll protect you, we'll even give you a nice pension.
Sweet knit a deal.
Exactly. And in return, Shah Alam granted them the Diwani, the right to collect revenue.
Oh, I see where this is going.
And not just any revenue, the revenue from Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. The economic heartland.
Brilliant. Keeping the emperor as this figurehead while they're raking in the profits.
A win-win, at least for them. This arrangement gave them access to incredible resources. They were no longer just a trading company. They were a revenue-collecting powerhouse.
It's amazing how they just kept adapting, evolving their strategy.
Yeah.
From trade to conquest to, I guess, political manipulation.
Always looking for an edge.
But their ambitions didn't stop there, did they?
Hmm.
I mean, what about the French? Weren't they still a threat in other parts of India?
The South was a whole different ballgame. And the French, they weren't going to just roll over. They had their own plans.
It's wild, right? You've got this whole drama unfolding in the north with the company, the Mughal emperor, and then boom, there's this intense rivalry playing out in the south with the French. It's almost like two completely different stories happening at the same time.
And it's a reminder that, the European presence in India wasn't this unified force. You had these different empires, each with their own agendas, their own, I guess you could say, baggage. And it all played out on this global stage, with India becoming a key battleground.
Right, like a proxy war, almost.
In a way, yeah. And to really grasp what was happening in the South, we need to rewind a bit, look at how French ambitions in India, how they really took shape.
Because the French, even though they showed up a bit later to the party, they were actually the first ones to seriously think about carving out a real territorial empire in India, right?
They were. And the figure who really embodies that ambition is Joseph Francois Duplessis.
Dupleix.
He was the governor general at Pondicherry, a brilliant strategist, a visionary, really, and he understood, maybe better than anyone at the time, the potential of exploiting those internal divisions within Indian states.
So he was using the same playbook that the British would later perfect in Bengal.
Exactly. Intervening in local disputes, installing puppet rulers, the whole nine yards.
So how did this Anglo-French rivalry actually play out on the ground? Things must have gotten pretty intense.
Oh, it was a brutal struggle for power. And it culminated in a series of wars, the Carnatic Wars, driven by, well, you name it, imperial ambitions, commercial rivalries, those shifting alliances between European powers and various Indian states. It was a real mess.
The Carnatic Wars. It sounds like something out of a movie. What were some of the key moments, the turning points in this whole fight for control?
Well, the First Carnatic War, it kicked off in 1746, triggered by, believe it or not, the War of the Austrian Succession in Europe.
Wow, so events happening halfway across the world were having this direct impact on India.
Global politics at play. The French, they initially had the upper hand at sea, and they actually managed to capture Madras, the British stronghold in the south. But the war ended in a stalemate. With the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748, Madras was returned to the British, and, well, everyone kind of went back to their corners.
A temporary truce, I imagine.
Just a pause, really, because then you have the Second Carnatic War erupting in 1749.
Round two. What sparked that one?
This time, it was all about succession disputes in the Deccan, in Hyderabad and Carnatic specifically. And this is where Dupleix, he really shines. He saw these disputes as a golden opportunity to expand French influence. He intervened, backed candidates who were, let's say, friendly to the French cause, and managed to install his own chosen rulers in both Hyderabad and Carnatic.
So he was basically playing chess with kingdoms.
He was a master of the game. And the British, well, they recognized the threat.
They weren't going to just sit back and watch.
They weren't. And who do you think they sent to counter Dupleix's moves?
I'm sensing a pattern here. It's got to be Clive again, right?
Clive it is. Fresh from his success in Bengal, he was dispatched south with reinforcements, and he captured Arcot, the capital of Carnatic, and reinstated Muhammad Ali, the British-backed candidate, as the Nawab.
So Clive, once again, saving the day for the British. But what about Dupleix? Did he just, I don't know, give up?
His downfall was, well, his ambition. All those campaigns, they drained French resources. And his political maneuvering back in India, that didn't sit well with everyone back home.
So he made some enemies.
Let's just say his popularity took a hit. In 1754, he was recalled to France, putting an end to his grand vision.
It's kind of a reminder that even the most, I don't know, cunning plans can fall apart.
It is. And while the Second Carnatic War officially ended with the Treaty of Pondicherry in 1754, things were still simmering. The French, they were down, but not out.
Just waiting for the right moment to strike back.
And that moment came with the 7 Years' War. It broke out in Europe in 1756, and, well, it provided the perfect backdrop for this final showdown between the British and the French in India.
The 7 Years' War. That was a global conflict with some serious consequences.
It was, and India was, well, caught in the middle of it. Both the British and the French governments, they knew how important India was strategically, so they poured resources, troops, everything they could into the fight.
A final, all-out battle for control.
Essentially, the French, initially led by the Count de Lely, they tried to regain what they had lost, to reestablish their dominance.
So what happened? Who came out on top?
The Third Carnatic War was a series of defeats for the French. Money troubles continued to plague them. The British, they had their superior navy, that steady flow of cash from Bengal, and this growing confidence.
Winning breeds more winning.
It does. And there were some key battles that really sealed the French fate. The fall of Chandernagore, their trading post in Bengal, that was a major blow. Then they lost the northern circles, these coastal districts the Nizam of Hyderabad had granted them. But the real turning point, the decisive battle, was Wandiwash in 1760.
Wandiwash. Another one for the history books.
It was a devastating defeat for the French. Their army was, well, let's just say they were already on the back foot, and the British, along with their Indian allies, they just crushed them.
The beginning of the end for French ambitions in India.
You could say that. The fall of Pondicherry, their stronghold in the south, in 1761, that pretty much marked the end of the Third Carnatic War. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1763, allowed the French to keep their trading posts, but they couldn't fortify them, so their military ambitions, they were effectively over.
Decades of struggle, and in the end, the British emerged as the undisputed European power in India.
It was a victory built on, well, on a lot of bloodshed, a lot of ambition,
Yeah.
and its consequences, they were far-reaching for the British, for the French, but most importantly for the people of India. With the French out of the picture, there was nothing to stop the British from expanding their influence, their control across the entire subcontinent. It was the foundation for the British Raj, an empire that would shape the destinies of both Britain and India for, well, for centuries.
It really makes you think about how these individual choices, these rivalries, these battles, how they can have these ripple effects that change the course of history.
And the East India Company, their story, it's not just about, buying and selling goods. It's about power, ambition, the desire for control. It's a human story, really.
And it leaves us with this question, doesn't it? Did the East India Company create the conditions for their conquest, or were they just really good at taking advantage of a situation that was already there, ripe for the taking?
A question that historians are still grappling with today. It's a question about empire, about colonialism, and the legacies that we're still, in many ways, dealing with.
We started with this trading company, this seemingly ordinary group of merchants, and ended up with, well, an empire. It's been a journey through intrigue, ambition, conflict, and I think it's safe to say a turning point in world history.
And with that, we come to the end of our deep dive into the rise of the British East India Company. But this is just the beginning. There's so much more to explore, to learn, to think about. So I encourage you to, well, to keep digging, keep questioning, and keep discovering the fascinating and often very complex stories that have shaped our world.